In a small Ohio courtroom, a black woman faced cruel mockery for daring to defend herself, until her razor-sharp legal mind exposed a corrupt system and turned her accusers' arrogance into their downfall, shocking everyone watching. The air in the Franklin County Courthouse clung to Nia Carter like a heavy fog, thick with the scent of polished wood and bitter judgment, pressing against her chest as she stood at the defendant's table, her slender hands gripping the edge so tightly her knuckles paled, the worn grain digging into her palms like a silent accusation. At 28, Nia was a self-taught legal researcher, her nights spent hunched over law books in the dim glow of her one-bedroom apartment, a modest space with peeling wallpaper and a single bulb that flickered when the wind blew too hard, her braids pulled back with a simple elastic, her navy blazer frayed at the cuffs, a stark contrast to the gleaming suits of the courtroom elite around her, their polished shoes clicking on the hardwood floor like a metronome of privilege. The gallery hummed with murmurs, rows of spectators craning their necks to stare, their whispers a low buzz that prickled at Nia's skin, their judgment as sharp as the late September chill that seeped through the courthouse's cracked windows, the glass smudged with years of neglect, letting in drafts that made the room feel colder, harsher, more unforgiving. Nia had been summoned here to face charges of fraud and identity theft, accusations that stemmed from a clerical error at a local bank, but the way the room looked at her, her blackness on trial as much as the charges, made it clear this was no simple misunderstanding, a trial where justice seemed a distant hope, buried beneath layers of prejudice as old as the town itself. Judge Harold Bennett, a 62-year-old white man with a shock of gray hair and a face carved with lines of disdain, sat high on his bench, his black robe a looming shadow over Nia, his pale blue eyes glinting with a cold contempt as he peered at her over his wire-rimmed glasses, his thin lips twisting into a sneer that spoke of a man who'd long ago traded fairness for control. He tapped his gavel with a lazy rhythm, each strike a hollow echo that sounded like a drum roll before a sentence, his voice dripping with condescension as it sliced through the tense air like a blade through silk. "You really think you can play lawyer, Miss Carter?" he drawled, his tone thick with mockery, each word a lash that stung deeper than the autumn wind outside, a lash that burned across Nia's pride, searing into her like a brand. "This isn't a library for you to play pretend. This is my courtroom." A ripple of laughter spread through the gallery, the bailiff, a burly white man named Tom, smirking as he leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, his badge catching the light like a silent threat, while the prosecutor, Edward Langston, a 45-year-old white man in a crisp pinstripe suit, adjusted his tie with a smug grin, his green eyes gleaming with the confidence of a man who'd never lost a case in this small town, a man who thrived on the convictions of those who looked like Nia, those he saw as easy targets in a system rigged in his favor. Nia's heart sank, a cold dread pooling in her stomach, a weight that felt like a stone dragging her into the depths, but she forced herself to stand taller, her chin lifting just enough to show she wouldn't break, even as their judgment pressed harder, threatening to crush her spirit into dust. The charges had started 6 months ago, a day Nia could still recall with painful clarity, the memory etched into her mind like a scar that refused to fade, when she'd tried to open a small business account for her freelance research work, a dream she'd nurtured since she was 16, sitting at her mother's kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea, listening to her late father's stories of justice, a community organizer who'd fought for fair housing in the 90s, his voice a steady beacon in a world that often felt dark, his words planting the seeds of resilience in her heart, seeds that had grown into a fierce determination to make a difference, to build a life where her voice mattered, where her work mattered, where she mattered. A bank teller had mixed up her information with another client's, a white woman named Karen Ellis, and when the error led to a frozen account, the bank accused Nia of fraud, claiming she'd stolen Karen's identity to siphon funds, a claim built on nothing more than a mismatched signature and a series of assumptions that clung to Nia's skin like a shadow she couldn't shake, assumptions that turned a clerical error into a nightmare in a town where her blackness marked her as an outsider, where the truth seemed a privilege reserved for those who didn't look like her, a privilege that felt further out of reach with every passing second in this courtroom, Every second she felt the gallery's eyes on her. Every second she heard their whispers grow louder, their judgment a rising tide she couldn't outrun. Edward stood, his polished shoes clicking sharply on the hardwood floor as he addressed the court, his voice booming with a rehearsed authority that filled the room like a storm rolling in. A storm Nia couldn't escape. A storm that made her heart race, her palms sweat, her breath catch in her throat. "Your Honor, the state will prove that Nia Carter deliberately impersonated a respected client to steal thousands, exploiting the trust of our financial institution," he declared, turning to the jury with a dramatic flourish, his words a heavy chain that wrapped around Nia's hopes. The jury, mostly white, mostly older, nodding along, their faces already set with suspicion, their eyes narrowing as they looked at Nia, seeing not a woman but a stereotype, a caricature of their own fears projected onto her skin, a projection that felt like a weight she couldn't lift, a weight that threatened to bury her dreams beneath its crushing force. Nia's breath hitched, a sharp ache of betrayal slicing through her, a pain that felt like a knife twisting in her chest, her dream of building a life through her research now a fading whisper, drowned out by the reality of a system that had already branded her guilty before she could even speak, a system that seemed to thrive on silencing voices like hers, voices that dared to speak against the grain, voices that dared to demand fairness in a town that offered none. She clenched her hands tighter, her nails biting into her palms, the sting a grounding force that kept her from unraveling, her father's lessons echoing in her ears, lessons about standing tall, about fighting for what was right, even when the odds were stacked against you, even when the world seemed determined to see you fall, lessons that felt like a shield now, a shield she'd need to survive this day, this room, this fight. But the courtroom had more in store, the air growing thicker as a new figure entered, a white woman in her late 30s, her blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, her tailored suit screaming wealth, her heels clicking with purpose as she took a seat in the front row, her blue eyes cold as they locked onto Nia, her lips pressed into a thin line, a line that spoke of a woman who knew the power she held, a power she wielded like a weapon. It was Karen Ellis herself, the woman whose identity Nia had supposedly stolen, her presence a silent accusation that thickened the air, a reminder of the privilege that had turned a clerical error into a nightmare, a privilege that Nia could never match, no matter how hard she worked, no matter how honest she lived, no matter how much she tried to prove herself in a town that refused to see her as anything more than a stereotype that now threatened to define her in the eyes of everyone watching, a stereotype that stripped away her humanity and left her exposed, vulnerable, raw. The gallery's whispers grew louder, their judgment now a roaring current that threatened to sweep Nia away, leaving her gasping for air, her dark eyes scanning the room for a single ally, finding none, her resolve wavering like a flame in a gale, a flame that flickered dangerously low, but beneath it, a core of determination burned, a fire her father had kindled years ago when he'd said, "Never let them silence you, Nia. Your voice is your power." That memory became her lifeline, a tether in the tempest, a tether she clung to with every ounce of her strength. But the tempest was only beginning, its winds howling louder, its waves rising higher, its fury unrelenting. Edward Langston stepped closer to the jury box, his pinstripe suit a sharp contrast to the faded wood, his green eyes flashing with a predatory glint as he held up a piece of paper. A bank statement with Nia's name circled in red ink, the numbers manipulated to look like a withdrawal she'd never made, a fabrication that twisted the truth into a noose around her neck. A noose that tightened with every second she stood there, every second the jury's eyes bore into her, every second their murmurs grew louder, their belief in her guilt a wall she couldn't breach. "This document proves Miss Carter's guilt beyond a doubt," Edward declared, his voice booming with a confidence that shook the room, each word a hammer striking at Nia's fragile hope, the jury leaning in, their faces hardening with every syllable, their whispers turning to nods of agreement, their conviction in her guilt solidifying like stone, a stone that threatened to crush her where she stood. Judge Bennett nodded, his gray hair catching the light, his pale blue eyes narrowing as he turned to Nia, his voice a low growl that cut through the air like a whip, its sting as sharp as the disdain in his gaze. "You've got quite the imagination, thinking you could fool this court with your little sob story," he sneered, his tone laced with venom, a venom that felt personal, as if Nia's very presence was an affront to his authority. "But I've seen your kind before. Always looking for a handout." The gallery erupted in laughter, a cruel wave that crashed over Nia, her chest tightening, her breath shallow, the shame burning through her like acid, her hands trembling as she clutched her stack of handwritten notes, her only anchor in a room that had already judged her, an anchor that felt as fragile as a thread against the torrent of their hatred. Karen Ellis leaned forward in her seat, her blue eyes drilling into Nia, her voice low but piercing as she whispered to the woman beside her, loud enough for Nia to hear, deliberate in its malice. She probably thought no one would notice, just another scam artist trying to take what's mine. The words landed like a blow, each one a reminder of the stereotypes Nia had fought against her entire life, stereotypes that had followed her from the schoolyard to her freelance gigs to this courtroom, stereotypes that now threatened to define her in the eyes of everyone watching, stereotypes that stripped away her humanity and left her exposed, vulnerable, raw. The gallery's laughter grew louder, a chorus of disdain that reverberated off the wooden walls, each snicker a needle pricking at Nia's dignity, her resolve fraying at the edges, the weight of their racism a crushing pressure that threatened to smother the fire inside her, a pressure that made her knees tremble, her vision blur, her heart race with a fear she couldn't shake, a fear that whispered she might not make it out of this room with her freedom, her dignity, her dream intact. She wanted to scream, to tell them she'd spent years scraping by on freelance gigs, saving every penny for her dream, a dream that had kept her going through sleepless nights and endless rejections, a dream that had given her purpose in a world that often felt determined to take it away. But her voice felt trapped, her throat tight with the terror of being dismissed again, her father's words a fading echo in the cacophony of their hatred. An echo that grew fainter with every cruel laugh, every whispered judgment, every sidelong glance that marked her as less than human. The tension in the room grew heavier as Edward continued, his voice now laced with a mock sympathy that made Nia's skin crawl, a tone that felt like salt in an open wound, a tone that mocked the very hope she was clinging to. "Your Honor, the defendant may claim innocence, but let's look at the facts," he said, holding up a second piece of evidence. A forged transaction log, Nia's name scrawled at the bottom in a handwriting that wasn't hers, the date matching the day of the alleged fraud, a document that had been altered to make it look like Nia had authorized the withdrawal, a lie that added another layer to the case against her, another brick in the wall that Edward was building to bury her alive. The jury murmured again, their heads nodding, their eyes narrowing further, their suspicion now a tangible force that pressed against Nia, a force that felt as real as the table under her hands, as real as the sweat trickling down her back, as real as the fear that threatened to swallow her whole. Nia's mind raced, her thoughts a jumbled mess of anger and despair, her memory flashing back to that day at the bank, to the moment she'd handed over her documents, her voice calm as she'd explained her account issue, the teller's fake smile a mask that hid his intentions. Intentions that had led to this moment, this courtroom, this nightmare. A nightmare she couldn't wake up from, a nightmare that felt more real with every piece of evidence Edward presented, every lie he told, every truth he buried. Just as she felt herself breaking, a quiet voice cut through the noise, steady and clear, like a single note piercing through a storm, a note that gave Nia a moment to breathe, a moment to hope. "That's not fair," the voice said, coming from a young white woman in the back of the gallery, her brown hair tied in a loose ponytail, her hazel eyes wide with a mix of nervousness and resolve, her name tag reading, "Clara Evans, Court Clerk," a tag that hung slightly askew on her blouse, a blouse that was wrinkled from a long day of work, a day that had led her to this moment, a moment where she chose to speak, to act, to stand against the tide. Clara stood, her hands fidgeting with her clipboard, her voice trembling but firm as she spoke again. "I've seen Nia's file. She's been trying to fix this error for months, The bank ignored her, and I know because I helped her file the complaints." Clara's words were a lifeline, a small act of defiance that cut through the gallery's laughter like a blade through silk. A moment of truth in a room full of lies. A moment that made Nia's heart leap in her chest. A moment that reminded her that she wasn't entirely alone. That there was someone in this room who saw her, who knew her, who believed in her. Someone who understood the weight of being dismissed, the weight of being unseen. The weight of fighting a system that refused to listen. The room fell silent for a heartbeat, the gallery's laughter dying in their throats. Edward's smirk faltering for just a moment, his green eyes darting to Clara with a flash of irritation, a flicker of anger that betrayed his polished facade, while Judge Bennett's scowl deepened, his gavel slamming down with a sharp crack that made Nia flinch, the sound echoing through the room like a gunshot, a sound that seemed to reverberate in Nia's chest, amplifying the pounding of her heart. "Order! Miss Evans, you're out of line. Sit down or you'll be removed," Judge Bennett bellowed, his voice booming, his pale blue eyes flashing with a fury that made Clara's cheeks flush, her hands trembling as she lowered herself back into her seat, her hazel eyes meeting Nia's for a fleeting second, a glimmer of kindness shining through her fear, a silent promise that Nia wasn't entirely alone, a promise that felt like a lifeline in the storm. A lifeline that Nia clung to with every ounce of her being. That small act of courage sparked a faint hope in Nia's chest, a warmth that pushed back against the cold dread, her trembling hands steadying as she gripped her notes tighter, her resolve reigniting like a candle in the dark, a candle that burned brighter with every second, a candle that reminded her of her father's lessons, of the strength she'd found in his words, of the power she carried within her, of power she'd need now more than ever. But Edward recovered swiftly, his sneer returning as he turned back to the jury, his voice thick with false pity, a tone that made Nia's stomach churn, a tone that mocked the hope Clara had just given her. "Let's not be swayed by misplaced sympathy. Miss Carter's actions speak louder than her excuses," Edward said, his words a dismissal of Clara's testimony, a dismissal that the jury seemed to accept, their heads nodding again, their distrust creeping back, their eyes narrowing once more, their suspicion a wall that Nia couldn't break through. A wall that seemed to grow higher with every word Edward spoke, every gesture he made, every lie he told. Nia's hope flickered, the warmth in her chest battling the cold dread that threatened to overwhelm her, her father's words a lifeline she clung to, a lifeline that felt thinner now, more fragile, but a lifeline nonetheless. A lifeline that reminded her of who she was, of what she was fighting for, of the dream that had brought her here, a dream that she refused to let them take away, no matter how hard they tried, no matter how much they hated her, no matter how much they wanted her to fail. Clara's words lingered in Nia's mind, a small spark in the darkness, a spark that refused to go out, a spark that kept her going as the storm roared on, its waves crashing higher, its roar growing louder, but its power no longer absolute, its grip no longer unbreakable, its victory no longer certain. Edward's voice rang out with cruel triumph. He held the grainy footage high. The jury's eyes locked on the screen. Nia's blurred face stared back, a twisted lie in black and white. "This seals her guilt, Your Honor," Edward said. His green eyes gleamed with victory. His pinstripe suit caught the light, a symbol of his untouchable confidence. The jury nodded slowly, their faces set with cold judgment. A woman in the front row, her gray hair tied back, whispered to the man beside her. "She looks guilty," she muttered, her voice low but sharp. The man nodded, his lips pressed tight, his eyes never leaving Nia. Judge Bennett leaned forward on his bench, his pale blue eyes narrowed into slits. "I've heard enough," he growled. His tone carried a heavy final edge. "Miss Carter, one chance to speak. Don't waste my time." The gallery buzzed with anticipation. Phones lifted high to record Nia's defeat. Karen Ellis sat in the front row, smirking. Her blue eyes glinted with icy disdain. Her tailored suit screamed privilege, a stark contrast to Nia's frayed blazer, a reminder of the worlds between them. Nia's hands shook as she gripped her notes. The pages were creased, ink smudged from late nights of study. Her small apartment flashed in her mind. Dim lights, stacks of law books, the scent of burnt coffee. She'd stayed up until dawn, her braids loose, her eyes burning, memorizing every statute, every precedent. Her father's words rang in her ears. "Your voice is your power." She took a deep breath. Her chest tightened with fear, a cold knot that wouldn't loosen. Her palms were slick with sweat, her fingers trembling against the paper. The gallery's whispers grew louder, a swarm of voices that stung her ears. "She doesn't belong here," someone hissed from the back. Another voice laughed, sharp and cruel. "Think she's a lawyer," they mocked. The words cut deep, each one a reminder of the racism that had followed her since childhood. Playground taunts, suspicious stares in stores, the way teachers assumed she'd fail. But something shifted inside her. A spark of defiance glowed faintly, a warmth against the chill of their hatred. She straightened her back. Her dark eyes met Judge Bennett's, unflinching. "Your Honor, I'll represent myself," she said. Her voice stayed steady, firm, a quiet challenge that sliced through the noise. The gallery fell silent for a heartbeat. Tension thickened the air, a weight that pressed on everyone. Judge Bennett blinked, caught off guard. His scowl faltered for a moment, his gray hair catching the light. "You'll what?" he snapped, his tone sharp as a whip. Nia didn't waver. Her fear turned to resolve, a quiet ember burning brighter with each passing second. "I'll defend myself. I know the law. I'm innocent." Her words were a declaration, a refusal to be silenced. The gallery erupted in murmurs. Some laughed, their mockery a bitter sting. A man in a plaid shirt scoffed loudly, shaking his head. "She's delusional," he muttered to his neighbor. A woman in a red scarf nodded, her lips curled in disdain. But others watched with curiosity, their eyes narrowing, a flicker of doubt in their gazes. Tom, the bailiff, shifted on his feet near the wall, his earlier smirk faded, replaced by a flicker of unease. He glanced at Judge Bennett, waiting for a reaction, his arms uncrossing for the first time. Edward's grin widened, his tone dripping with scorn. "Go ahead, Miss Carter. Dig your own grave." His words landed like a challenge, a taunt meant to break her. Nia stood taller, her frayed blazer a mark of her struggle, a symbol of the years she'd fought to be seen. She'd spent countless nights studying law in secret, hiding in her apartment while the world dismissed her. Her community, black families in Franklin County, had watched her grow up, cheering her on despite their own battles with bias. She thought of her neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, a single mother who'd been denied loans because of her skin color. She thought of her cousin, Malik, who'd been stopped by police for looking suspicious at 15, his dreams of college delayed by the trauma. Nia's fight wasn't just for her, it was for them. For every black person who'd been silenced, every dream crushed by a system that refused to see their worth. Her resolve hardened like steel, her fear now a distant echo. She glanced at the jury, her dark eyes scanning their faces. A young man in the back, his tie loose, met her gaze for a moment. His expression softened, a crack in the wall of their judgment, a sign that some were listening, that some might see her truth. Clara stood suddenly, her clipboard trembling in her hands. Her hazel eyes burned with courage, a fire Nia hadn't expected. "Your Honor, I have evidence," she said. Her voice cut through the murmurs, clear and steady, a note of defiance in the chaos. She held up a USB drive. Its black plastic caught the courtroom lights. A small object with the power to change everything. "This is the unedited footage. It proves Nia was framed." Her words struck like a thunderclap, a jolt that silenced the room. The gallery's murmurs stopped cold. Edward's smirk vanished instantly, his face turning pale. His hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white against his suit. Judge Bennett's gavel froze mid-air, his pale blue eyes wide with surprise. The jury leaned forward, their faces shifting, doubt creeping into their expressions. A woman in the second row, her glasses slipping down her nose, whispered to the person beside her. "Could she be telling the truth?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The man beside her frowned, his brow furrowing, his earlier certainty shaken. Nia's heart leaped, her dread melting into a surge of hope, a wave that lifted her above the storm. Clara's bravery was a lifeline, a light in the darkness of the courtroom, a reminder that kindness could break through even the hardest walls. She thought of her father again, his voice steady in her memory, his lessons about justice a shield she carried now. The gallery's earlier scorn faded, replaced by a tense anticipation. Karen Ellis shifted in her seat, her icy smirk replaced by a flicker of panic. Her fingers gripped the edge of her chair, her blue eyes darting to Edward, searching for reassurance that wasn't there. Nia felt the shift, the balance tipping in her favor, a moment of clarity in the chaos. Her hope burned brighter, a flame that no amount of bias could extinguish, a flame that lit her path forward, a path she'd walk with every ounce of strength she had. Clara's words lingered, a spark that ignited the room. The gallery sat silent, their breath held tight, their phones still raised but now capturing a different story. The jury's eyes darted between Nia and Clara, their suspicion wavering, uncertainty taking root like a weed. Nia stepped forward, her frayed blazer now a badge of resilience, a testament to her fight. Her dark eyes blazed with determination, a fire that caught Edward off guard. He flinched, his green eyes narrowing, his polished demeanor cracking like thin ice. "Your Honor, play this footage now," Nia said. Her voice was firm, a command wrapped in calm, a strength that echoed through the room. She nodded to Clara, their eyes meeting in a silent pact, a bond forged in the heat of this battle. Judge Bennett hesitated, his scowl deep, his fingers gripping his gavel tightly. The gallery's anticipation forced his hand, their eyes boring into him, demanding the truth. "Proceed, but no tricks," he muttered, his tone gruff, his pale blue eyes flickering with doubt for the first time. Clara plugged in the USB, her fingers moving quickly, steady now. The screen flickered to life, casting a faint glow across the courtroom. The unedited footage showed Nia at the bank's counter, her navy blazer standing out against the white walls. She handed over papers, her voice calm, explaining her account issue. Her braids caught the faint light, a detail that grounded her in the moment. The teller, Greg Harper, smiled, his grin fake, his eyes darting to the side. His hand slipped a forged signature into the file as Nia turned away, unaware of his betrayal. The timestamp proved she'd left long before the fraud, a truth that shattered Edward's lie like glass. The gallery gasped, a wave of shock rippling through them, their voices a low hum of disbelief. Phones captured the truth unfolding, their flashes lighting up the room. Karen Ellis's smirk disappeared, her blue eyes widening with fear. Her tailored suit couldn't shield her now, her hands trembling as she gripped her purse, her knuckles white, her privilege unraveling with every second. Nia turned to the jury, her voice sharp, a blade of truth cutting through the silence. "This footage proves the bank framed me. Mr. Langston knew and hid it." Her words struck hard, exposing the corruption at the core. Edward's face turned red, his polished demeanor gone. His hands fumbled with his papers, dropping a pen that rolled across the table with a faint clatter. "This isn't allowed, Your Honor," he stammered, his voice shaking, a man watching his career crumble. Nia pressed on, her legal knowledge a weapon honed by years of study, a sword she wielded with precision. "I have the bank's emails legally obtained," she said. She held up a stack of papers, their black ink a testament to their corruption. A line in red ink stood out. "She's an easy target." The jury gasped again, a collective intake of breath that filled the room. Their faces changed, guilt replacing judgment, their earlier bias now a bitter taste they couldn't ignore. A man in the back row, his tie slightly crooked, clenched his fists, his eyes dropping to his lap, shame etched into his features. A woman beside him adjusted her glasses, her lips parting in shock, her earlier certainty replaced by doubt. Nia turned to Judge Bennett, her voice steady but laced with a quiet triumph, a melody that rose above the chaos. "These emails show Mr. Harper and Mr. Langston planned this. They targeted me because I'm a black woman, because they thought no one would care." Her words were a spotlight, illuminating the racism that had fueled this case. The gallery's murmurs turned to whispers of awe, their judgment flipping to Edward and Karen. A young woman in the back, her hair in a messy bun, whispered to her friend, "She's incredible." Her friend nodded, her eyes wide, her phone lowering as she watched Nia with newfound respect. Karen Ellis shrank in her seat, her blonde hair falling into her face, her earlier confidence gone, replaced by a quiet panic. She glanced at the exit, her heels shifting as if ready to run, her role in this setup now a weight she couldn't bear. Judge Bennett's gavel hit the desk, a weak thud that echoed through the silence. His pale blue eyes locked on Edward, his voice low, heavy with doubt. "Explain this, counselor, now." His tone was a warning, a crack in the authority he'd wielded so carelessly. Edward shrank back, his green eyes darting to the gallery, searching for an escape that wasn't there. His hands shook, his voice a whisper barely audible. "I didn't know." His words were hollow, a lie that fooled no one. Judge Bennett rubbed his temple, his gray hair catching the light, his expression unreadable. He glanced at the jury, their faces a mix of shock and guilt, their earlier judgment now a memory they regretted. He looked back at Nia, his scowl softening for the first time, a flicker of respect in his gaze. A man forced to face the truth he'd ignored. Nia stood tall, her heart pounding with triumph, a rhythm that drowned out the storm. Relief washed over her, a gentle wave after a long battle, a warmth that soothed the wounds of the past hour. Clara stepped closer, her hazel eyes shining with pride, her clipboard forgotten on the table. "You did it," she whispered, her voice soft but clear, a note of kindness that grounded Nia. Nia nodded, her resolve now a glow of victory, a light that filled the room. She thought of her father, his legacy alive in her voice, a voice that had shattered the lies and brought justice to light. The gallery's eyes turned to Edward, their judgment now a spotlight on him, their awe at Nia's resilience a melody that drowned out their earlier scorn. Outside the courtroom, word of Nia's victory spread quickly, a ripple that reached the streets of Franklin County. A group of young black women stood across the street, their eyes wide, their voices a mix of awe and hope. "She beat them," one said, her voice trembling, her hands clutching a worn notebook, dreams of law school now a possibility she could see. Another nodded, her braids swinging as she smiled, her voice soft but firm. "She's one of us," she said, a statement of pride, a reminder that Nia's win was theirs too, a beacon for every black woman who'd been dismissed, a spark that could light a movement. Nia's fight had shown them that the system wasn't unbreakable, that their voices mattered, that they could rise above the bias that had held them down for so long. Her triumph wasn't just a win in court, it was a promise, a glow that would inspire others to fight, a light that no amount of darkness could dim. Edward's voice broke as he spoke, his green eyes darted wildly. "Your Honor, I had no knowledge of these emails," he stammered. His hands shook, clutching crumpled papers. Sweat beaded on his forehead, staining his crisp, pinstripe suit. Judge Bennett's scowl deepened, his pale blue eyes cold as ice. "5 minutes, counselor," he growled. His voice was a low rumble, silencing the room. "Convince me, or I'll order an investigation." Edward's face paled further, his confidence gone. He dropped a paper, his fingers trembling. Karen Ellis shrank in her seat, her blonde hair slipping from its bun. Her blue eyes avoided the gallery, her tailored suit now a reminder of her complicity. She clutched her purse, her knuckles white, her earlier arrogance replaced by fear. Nia stood tall, her frayed blazer a symbol of resilience. Her dark eyes stayed steady, watching the chaos she'd unleashed. Her triumph warmed her, a quiet glow against the courtroom's chill. Clara stepped forward, her hazel eyes sharp with purpose. She set her clipboard down, her hands steady now. "Your Honor, I can testify," she said. Her voice was clear, unwavering. "I accessed these emails myself. The bank targeted Nia because of her race." The gallery gasped, a sharp intake of breath. The jury nodded slowly, their faces softening. A man in the front row, his tie loose, looked down, guilt in his eyes. A woman beside him adjusted her glasses, her lips parting in shame. Their earlier bias now stung, a bitter memory they couldn't ignore. Judge Bennett sighed, his hand rubbing his temple. His gray hair caught the light, his voice heavy. "Case dismissed," he said. "Miss Carter, you're free to go. I'll recommend a full investigation." Silence held the room for a moment, then chaos broke loose. The gallery buzzed, some clapping, others whispering in awe. Phones captured the moment. A story of justice unfolding. Nia's heart swelled, relief washing over her, a gentle tide after a storm. Her relief turned to pride, a steady flame, knowing she'd fought and won. Edward stumbled as Tom escorted him out. The bailiff's grip was firm, his face unreadable. His earlier smirk was gone, replaced by a stiff nod. Karen slipped out the back door, her heels clicking quickly. Her head stayed low, avoiding the crowd's gaze. Her tailored suit seemed smaller now, a symbol of her downfall. Nia sat at the defendant's table with Clara. Her hands traced her signature on the dismissed charges. The paper felt light, her freedom real at last. Her fingers no longer shook, her breath steady. The courtroom began to empty, the gallery's whispers fading. Judge Bennett approached, his steps slow. His gray hair gleamed under the lights, his pale blue eyes softer now. "Miss Carter, I owe you an apology," he said. His voice was low, sincere. "I was wrong about you. I'll make sure this doesn't happen again." Nia nodded, her heart softening. A quiet forgiveness settled in her chest. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said. Her voice was steady, firm. "Just make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." They shook hands, a firm grip, a bridge built across a divide. It was a promise of change, a step toward a better system, one Nia had forced to see her worth. The aftermath moved quickly, a wave of justice sweeping Franklin County. The bank issued a public apology 2 days later. They paid Nia a settlement, a sum pressed by the courts. Edward faced disbarment, his name ruined, a cautionary tale in legal circles. Nia held the settlement check in her hands, her fingers tracing the numbers. She stood in her small apartment, law books still stacked on the table. Her braids were loose, her navy blazer hung on a chair. She knew what to do next. A week later, she opened Carter Legal Aid, a small office on the edge of town. The space was modest, walls lined with books, a single desk in the center. A photo of her father sat on the shelf, his smile a quiet encouragement. Nia watched a young client, a black teenager named Jamal, sort through case files. He'd been accused of theft, another victim of bias. His hands moved carefully, his eyes focused, hope in his gaze. Nia's chest tightened with pride, a deep warmth, knowing she'd built a legacy her father would cherish. A legacy of justice that would echo for years, a safe space for those the system had failed, a testament to her unyielding fight. 3 months later, Nia stood in her office doorway. Carter Legal Aid buzzed with quiet energy, a hub for justice in Franklin County. The walls held thank you letters pinned neatly in rows. Photos of clients smiled back, their faces bright with gratitude. A hand-painted sign hung above the door, Carter Legal Aid in bold letters. The paint was chipped from Ohio winds, but it stood firm, a beacon for the silenced. Nia's story had spread through the community, a wildfire of inspiration. Her name echoed at town halls, spoken with awe. She'd become a local hero, her courage a spark that lit change in a town that once dismissed her. Her office was a sanctuary, a place where voices long ignored found strength, where justice wasn't a dream but a fight she led. Nia started a mentorship program, her focus on young black aspiring lawyers. She taught them the law, her voice steady, her lessons sharp. But she also taught survival, how to navigate a world that often refused to see their worth. "Your voice is your power," she told them, her tone firm. "Don't let anyone take it away." Her students listened, their notebooks open, their eyes wide. A girl named Aisha, barely 17, wrote quickly, her pen scratching the page. She dreamed of law school, her braids tied back, her determination a mirror of Nia's own. Clara volunteered at the office, her hazel eyes bright with purpose. She filed cases, her court clerk skills a quiet help. Her laughter rang through the room, a bright note in the hum of work. Their friendship had deepened, a bond forged in the courtroom's fire, a shared belief in justice holding them close. Nia watched Clara staple a file, her hands quick, her smile warm. Gratitude filled Nia, a soft glow, knowing she'd found an ally who'd stood with her when no one else would, a partner in the fight for change. The impact rippled beyond her office, a wave touching Franklin County's core. The courthouse, under new oversight, rolled out bias training. It was mandatory, a direct result of Nia's case. The scandal had forced change, ensuring no one else faced the racism Nia endured. New policies stood as proof of her fight, a system forced to reflect and shift. Edward faced his reckoning, disbarred and disgraced. Karen testified in the bank's investigation, her privilege stripped away, her actions a lesson in accountability. Nia's resilience had taught them both, a hard truth they couldn't escape. Her victory wasn't just hers. It was a lesson for the town, a reminder that justice could rise above bias, that one woman's voice could echo louder than a system's lies. Nia stepped outside her office, the air crisp with autumn's scent. Leaves crunched under her shoes, a soft rhythm as she walked. A young girl, maybe 10, passed by with her mother. The girl's small hand pointed at the sign, her brown eyes wide. "Carter Legal Aid," she read, her voice high, clear. Her mother knelt down, her tone warm, her smile proud. "That's where a brave woman fought for justice," she said. "And she won?" The girl nodded, her eyes sparkling, a seed of inspiration planted. Nia overheard, her throat tightening, a lump forming. A sense of belonging washed over her, a gentle wave, not from the system's acceptance, but from the community's embrace. From those who saw her as a hero, a woman who'd turned pain into purpose. Her gratitude deepened into fulfillment, a steady light knowing her fight had lit a path for others. A path where they could walk with pride. Dear viewer, Nia's journey shows us justice isn't handed out, it's fought for. The truth can break through the darkest lies if we dare to speak it. Her story calls to every heart willing to listen, a reminder of the power we hold. Have you ever faced a system that tried to silence you? Share your story below. We want to hear your strength, your fight, just like Nia's. If her journey moved you, like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell for more stories of resilience and justice. Tales that remind us of the strength inside us all. Let's build a world where every voice is heard, where no one is judged by their skin, because the truth doesn't wait for permission, it just needs someone brave to carry it, to let it shine for all to see.